Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a modern campaign agency dedicated to using data-driven grassroots organising to build winning campaigns and make the world a better place. Whether you're in business, issue-based campaigns or an organisation driving change, Dunn Street develops strategies to overcome challenges by connecting people that share the same values and organises them to achieve common goals from the ground up, just like we've been doing in the last couple of months across the United States and up and down the country. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to episode 23 of Socially Democratic, your centre-left weekly and cultural podcast that will dive into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them home and abroad. And I am finally back home in Melbourne and it is freaking freezing. But not to worry, I have a heater. We had on the phone today Brett Gale, who is the Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre. There is a pretty cool conference coming up this coming weekend in Sydney, New South Wales on December the 7th and 8th, which the Chifley Research Centre is hosting. It's called Towards 2022, Ideas for Labor and Australia. They've got a whole heap of international and Australian guests. That's like over 23, 24 speakers, panels, sessions, juggling, fire breathing, you name it, they've got it. So I thought I'd get Brett on, Brett. I thought I'd get Brett on just to do a bit of a preview of the conference for those of you who are attending, and for those of you that are not, this is what you're going to be missing out on. Don't worry though, because Socially Democratic is the official podcast sponsor for the conference, and we'll be recording a number of those sessions and publishing them here for your listening pleasure as we head into Christmas. So that should be great. Looking forward to talking to Brett this afternoon. Also, don't forget to follow Socially Democratic via Dunn Street on all of our socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And to follow the podcast, you need to just not take that call. You need to speak to Apple. You need to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. And if you are using Apple Podcasts, please give us a review and leave a rating. Arigato gozaimasu. Gorov. Let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one on a Tuesday afternoon in Melbourne. And coming up this weekend on December the 7th and 8th in Sydney, the Chifley Research Centre is hosting a conference titled Towards 2022, Ideas for Labor and Australia. And with a slew of international and Australian guest speakers that will be appearing across the weekend, we thought it would be a great opportunity to talk to the person who's largely behind organising this weekend conference, Brett Gale, who is the Executive Director for the Chifley Research Centre. Brett, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks, Stephen. Great to be here again. I hope you're having fun down in Melbourne. I see you've been travelling the world, I noticed, on behalf of Dunn Street and Socially Democratic.
I have indeed. This is the first week back in Melbourne after being in the States for a couple of weeks, and then I was up in the Territory doing some training last week and actually spoke to Michael Gunner on the podcast about the great things that he and his government are doing in the Territory. So it's good to be back in Melbourne, although it's meant to be summer and it's quite cold this week.
Well, it's not so cold here.
I'm looking forward to getting
very smoky.
Yeah, looking forward to getting up to Sydney and getting a bit of sunshine again. Towards 2022, I don't know if you recall a TV show on Channel 7 in the 1980s called Beyond 2000, which was religious viewing for me when I was going through high school. Towards 2022, I wonder if you'll be doing the same thing as Beyond 2000 did, was talking about the information superhighway and phones that can be taken outside of the home, because we've already got them, Brett.
We do have them. I remember the show. I don't remember what they were predicting, but I did watch the other week Back to the Future 2 with my daughter, And, that was set in 2015, and I am still waiting for my hoverboard. So not all future predictions come true, but we're trying to limit ourselves to sort of what might happen in 3 years' time rather than, I guess, the far future.
Excellent. Well, let's. I am a massive Back to the Future. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a huge Back to the Future fan, and I literally could do an entire podcast simply on Back to the Future, and then one on the second one, and on the third one, which was the lesser of the three in the trilogy. But let's not.
By far the lesser of the three.
But let's not do that. Let's get into talking a bit about this conference that's coming up this weekend. But before we do that. Just to refresh our listeners, that when you and I last spoke, Labor had just lost the federal election this year. The Red Sox starting rotation was starting to show signs of a post-World Series hangover. And at the time, we questioned the future of social democratic parties and that experiment. And since then, we've had the Weatherall-Emerson review into the Labor campaign. And you've just recently wrote a piece in The Guardian last week, in fact, on that social democratic coalition, and suggested that with the mix of the sort of current economic climate, income inequality, wage stagnation, this should be the time for centre-left parties to be electorally successful. But as you point out in your example, there are good examples across Western democracies, Western liberal democracies, that this isn't the case. And I just want to get your thoughts on why that is not the case.
Yeah, things haven't gotten any better since we spoke back in June, I think. Labor's still in opposition, unfortunately, and the Red Sox had a terrible year.
We sucked.
They did. And they're in danger of losing the best player they have on their team. But anyway, I digress. What I think is important is we're talking about a social democratic coalition. And I think although social democratic parties don't necessarily think of themselves as a coalition, like the coalition governments here, I think, the success of over 40 years was built up on this sort of marriage of, if you like, working class voters and highly educated, socially progressive voters. And I think that was the secret of success for sort of 40 years, since the early 70s. Prior to that, it was mainly built on working class success. But the recent times, I think that has been the successful model. And I think what we have seen, unfortunately, in the last sort of decade, I guess, but certainly accelerated in the last sort of 5 years, is almost a fracturing of that coalition between progressive voters and working class voters. And I think for potentially different reasons, and I think Social Democrats are in trouble for different reasons. I think we are still struggling as social democratic movements with a narrative that takes into account where we are in the world and where economic circumstances are and where social circumstances are. And while I think I say in that piece in The Guardian last week that if ever there was a time for social democratic parties and the things that we believe in, they are now. But I think that in Europe in particular, we've had the social democrats still have not recovered from their role as governments during the global financial crisis, and are partly seen as being, I guess, tools of the establishment, part of the system that let people down. And certainly in France and Germany and other places where social democrats are languishing in sort of single digits or in low teens, I think that's certainly the case with the voting blocs. We have seen, since we spoke, some lights on the hill in terms of Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Denmark. I think probably both, since we spoke, have both sort of had socially democratic governments. And interestingly, in the Denmark case, it seems to be that they made a strong pitch to working class voters and were unashamed in their pitch to working class voters. And I think that, unfortunately, for a lot of social democratic parties, instead of having a coherent narrative that can marry and work and reach out to all those classes of voters, we've tried to have lots and lots of policies that might appeal to different sections. And I think that's been a fundamental mistake that we've made in recent years across the world. And I think the Emerson Weatherall Review makes that point clearly, that was one of the problems that we faced in the last federal election. I think it's pretty standard belief that in the last American election that was a similar problem for Hillary Clinton in her campaign, that she had no single narrative, that there were lots and lots of policies that would do good things for lots of different groups, but nothing that sort of hung them together and wrapped them all in a bow that could be neatly presented as a sort of vision of where the Social Democratic side wanted to take the country.
When I was up in Darwin last week and I was catching up with some colleagues that span across the Labor movement, and I was mentioning that I was heading to Sydney next weekend for the Chifley conference, and I was just sort of talking to them a bit about the purpose of the conference, which I'll get you to do in a moment. But primarily, I sort of said it was going to be focusing heavily on policy and the policies that make up this social democratic framework of ours. And someone sort of put to me and said, Stephen, I think we're doing okay on the policy side. I think we need to be getting together our best campaigners from all the different aspects of campaigns and having a conversation about how we campaign to the electorate as opposed to the policy settings we take. I didn't completely agree with everything that they were saying, but it was an interesting point, and I did go away and think about that. You know, as a campaigner, compared to, say, the 2010 and 2013 federal elections, and maybe even the 2016 one as well, but certainly 10 and 13, this most recent election, we had a lot more to say on how Labor can govern and make the lives of working people easier. So what is your hypothesis? Do you think that the foundations of all the policy work that Labor has been doing, say, in the last 5 or 6 years is sound, but it's just the way that we are communicating it to the electorate, that we're just not being able to communicate it in a way that voters can understand and consume it and then move them to vote for Labor candidates?
I think so. I think there's a fair bit of truth in both of those things, and I think a campaigning seminar would be a great idea. Chifley is a policy research think tank, so that's why we're concentrating a little bit on the policy arm. But having said that, the conference, and we will come to it, has many sessions on sort of how to campaign and how to communicate with people and those sort of discussions as well, what I might call the political discussions as well as the policy. In terms of where we are, I think it's clear, and I think it is something that, again, that the Wetherell-Emerson review picked up on, and and I think maybe this might be what your interlocutor was getting at, and that is this coherent narrative piece about what Labor stands for. And I think that, yes, prior to the election, I don't think there was anyone in the Labor movement at all who would not have been proud of the policy suite that we took to that election and have not have believed that it would make the lives of all Australians better and have made Australia a better and fairer place. So I think the sort of thoughts and the deep work that went into policy is not to be faulted at all. People can quibble about individual policies in hindsight, but I think the sort of work that went into that and went into developing those policies and the sort of direction and, I guess, understanding of some of the challenges we faced as a nation was spot on. But I do think we were lax in not being able to have a coherent narrative and a coherent vision. And while you're right about the suite of policies may well have done more about making working people's lives easier, I'm not necessarily convinced that they were the policies we talked about all the time, certainly perhaps not in a digestible way. And I think, it is possible to have a suite of policies to take to an election, but in the end of the day, what you're judged on is the ones that you talk about. And people believe that your values are in line with the ones you're talking about, even if you have a whole suite of other policies. So I think this concept that we had too many that people were not able to digest and therefore were not able to work out what we were saying to them, I think is very true. We've recently done some research that we'll be discussing in the lead up to the conference. And one of the things we were testing is people who were thinking of voting Labor but didn't vote Labor. What were some of the reasons for their shifts? And from that research, it's sort of clear that it wasn't the policy per se, but it was, I guess, the volume of policies and the lack of a narrative around them. is something that we've found to be a factor. And I think, as I say, I think that's what the review found as well. So certainly your source in Darwin, I think, has hit the nail on the head in terms of some of what we need to do going forward. But having said that, we have been working on policies for the 2019 election. In 2022, the next election, it'll be a different ballgame. And I think that we would be foolish to necessarily just replicate the policies that we had now. We do need to think about and see where all sorts of conditions, economic and social, for Australia are, as well as where the budgetary position is as well. So I think having a conference that begins the conversation on what are the policy agenda for the next term, I think is really important.
Well, that's a great segue into talking about the conference itself, which is coming up this weekend. Tell me a bit about the genesis of the conference and what's the ultimate goal that you want to achieve across Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, so the ultimate goal, I guess, is twofold. One is, as we all know, we've had a pretty shit year. If you're a Labor supporter, we've lost the federal election. If you particularly live in New South Wales, we lost in New South Wales, as well as we've had other scandals as well. So part of the aim of the conference is to get Labor people together, and not just from Sydney and New South Wales. We've got lots of people coming from interstate. I was down at the Victorian State Conference for a fringe event the other weekend, and a lot of people came up to me and told me they were coming up. So we've got people coming from all over the place. But part of it is to give people, Labor people are pretty resilient and we always keep fighting. We don't ever get down for too long. But part of it is to give people that sense of hope again, and a sense of a feeling that, yep, okay, we've had a bad year, but we're going to go into the next year looking forward. We're going to go into next year feeling good about the fact that Labor is still here and Labor is still ready to fight for the things that we believe in and for the people that need Labor governments to help them. So that's one of it. The other part is literally to kickstart the conversation on where we should go in policy and campaigning and politics, in a sense. We've had almost 6 months of sort of review since the election, and that was appropriate. And it's great that we did such a comprehensive review that was put out publicly. For the first time, it shows a great level of transparency and maturity, I think, inside the Labor Party. But as Albo said in responding to that review at the National Press Club just after it was launched, now's the time to draw a line under that and move on. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do with this conference as well. That's the other ultimate goal, to kickstart that conversation and get people involved and get people thinking outside of what happened in May, but more towards what might happen in May 2022 and what can we do about it.
Excellent. That would also mean a good title for the conference, Drawing a Line and Moving Forward.
That's true.
let's do that. Let's draw that line and move forward. Kicking off the conference on day one, you've for those people that will be attending, you've lined up via video link the economic and social theorist Jeremy Rifkin to tick things off. What's Jeremy going to be speaking about to launch or kickstart this 2-day conference on policy?
Yeah, so the way we've sort of tried to set up the days is not necessarily the themes of the days, because there are so many different themes, different sessions, but we've tried to have, I guess, someone who can give us a big picture on policy challenges that we face, and that's Jeremy Rifkin. So he'll be talking a bit about this confluence of the new industrial revolution and climate change, two massive structural shifts that are happening across the global economy, and how we can weave both of those things together to help combat climate change, but also to help capitalise on what's happening in the new industrial revolution. So he'll be talking about that sort of stuff. He's been an advisor to the EU and to Angela Merkel and to the Chinese government as well on dealing with climate change, as well as incorporating an element of economic growth in that. So, so he's really there to give us, a big picture policy landscape for the conference, to just get people's minds buzzing and active and thinking.
It's actually a very good structure, the way that you have set up the 2 days, similar to what we did down in Victoria when we had the Labor Activist Conference in August in 2018. where you would have a plenary session at the start, which will set the scene, and then people can then go and break up into, there is 2 or 3 simultaneous sessions running that attendees can choose from, which is fantastic. Also, a bit of a challenge for people because they've got to work out which ones they want to go to. And I noticed that when we did it in 2018 down in Victoria, at the break, I saw some groups of people meeting together and divvying up which sessions they were going to go to, and then we were going to report back at the break. So that was quite funny how people worked out how to get around the challenge of can't being at 2 places at one time.
No, indeed, and I wish I could be too, going to all of these sessions. But what we're trying to do is cater to all interests in all parts of the labour movement and sort of a whole range of different policy and political challenges. So, yeah, as you say, it's a pretty full agenda. I think we've got 24 odd different sessions, including plenaries. But, we're trying to give people a chance to really get their teeth into issues that might interest them or something that they haven't thought about before, and suddenly they'll find that it really is an interesting topic.
And there's definitely something in there for everyone, which is great, the way that you and you guys at Chifley have designed this program. Before we do break into those sessions, we're going to get an address from the federal Labor leader, Anthony Albanese. Any insights into what his remarks will be for the conference?
No, I don't.
Good answer.
Other than that, we're really pleased that he's using the Chifley conference to give one of his headland speeches. He's done a couple already, and he's we're quite thrilled that he's using Chifley to do that and to set one of those headland speeches and to set some markers out for where he sees Labor going. So I think it's going to be really interesting and good session.
How have you seen his leadership going in the early stages, sort of 12 months in almost, or actually no, not even 12 months, but we're coming towards the end of the calendar year.
6 months, I would suggest.
That's a good point actually, yeah. What have been some of the challenges you think he's faced in the embryonic stages of his leadership?
Oh, look, I think the biggest challenge for Anthony and for anybody who becomes a Labor leader after what was a shock loss is to keep the show together and also get people out of the doldrums, because quite rightly, Labor supporters across Australia were in quite a depressed state after the election result. And you can only imagine, not being an MP, I can only imagine what MPs were going through and thinking. So, part of his job has been to do that, has been to, pick Labor up, to lead Labor in Parliament in that task, and to, and to try and, as I say, keep the show together and keep people, focused on the task at hand and not falling too much into despair. And I think in recent weeks we've seen some fruits in that success in terms of particularly the parliamentary performance and holding the government to account in Parliament with the missteps they've made in the last week or so. So I think that's been really, a really quite good thing. And I think the other challenge has been, to begin setting the vision for where we want to go without jumping too full on, realising that we've got 3 years to the next elections, and without jumping too full on into what policies are we going to take to the next election, where are we headed, what's going to be, which a number of journalists are demanding and seem to be getting quite frustrated that Labor hasn't danced to their tune of throwing everything out that we took to the election and coming up with a whole new suite of policies within 6 months. Now, I think it's entirely appropriate that we haven't done that, and we shouldn't be dancing to the tune of the media in that area. And Labor should take its time, come up with a great policy suite, come up with a narrative that it can take to the election to help us win votes. And I think what Albo's been doing is setting out a bit of that narrative and a bit of his vision for where he'd like the Labor Party to go.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that the way that the media are trying to hold the new leadership to account in terms of that policy development. Meanwhile, on the other side of the chamber, we're getting absolutely nothing from the actual government, and that's actually their job, is to deliver policies. But we all knew that this was going to be a bit of a challenge for them because during the actual election campaign, they didn't have any policies. And now
they are delivering exactly what they promised in the election, one could argue.
Yeah, sweet FA. Then we sort of break out into some groups for all the various simultaneous sessions. One of them jumped out at me, which I always love, because it's just a perennial debate that seems to be going on in the party in the last couple of years. Is Labor losing the working class? And I sarcastically note to you, is there a session in there which is also called "When Will Federal Labor Start Winning the Working Class Back Again?" Are we going to play Pulp's Common People underneath it whilst they do that session, just to really drive home,
Well, sure, we might even have a few other working class songs. We'll bring out some Pete Seeger as well. Why not? No, look, it's a great question, Stephen, and I understand that it is a perennial question. I think it's a serious issue that we need to discuss, because I think there is evidence, as the review pointed out, that we have lost some support amongst economically insecure and low-income working families, and not. And in some seats, we've lost support for them in Western Sydney seats, even though we haven't lost the seats. But it's a similar demographic to parts of Queensland where we have lost seats. So I think it's a really important question to have, and goes back to that, that whole bringing back together the progressive and working class coalition that has delivered us. But for those who are interested, and I think you are saying how we're going to start winning the middle class. We have lots and lots of policy sessions that go to what one might call the aspirational middle class, in terms of policy on superannuation, or policy on healthcare, or policy on various other things as well. So no, we are interested in helping to pursue the broadest possible coalition of Labor voters there is. But as I say, I think it's one of those important questions, as is the session, which unfortunately is on at exactly the same time, on talking to rural and regional voters, which are very very important, and are taken for granted for too long by the National Party, and really. Labor needs to step up its game in rural and regional areas. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about how we might do that.
Interesting also, you've managed to snag Grant Robertson, who's the Finance Minister in the New Zealand Labor government, and he's coming over to talk a bit about the lessons from in New Zealand for social democratic parties. For those of you who don't know, Grant, really impressive Labor person, Wellington-based MP, largely sort of, I don't know if he's credited, but certainly there's a view that he was the numbers person behind Jacinda Ardern's elevation to the leadership, and did a lot of heavy policy lifting on the economic front in the lead up to the 2007 national elections for New Zealand. So great that you've got Grant coming over as well to talk to us. Yeah,
no, we're very happy with that, and that's thanks to our good friends at Australian Labor International, who have helped make that possible and have facilitated Grant and some of our other international speakers coming over. So, yeah, no, we're really excited about hearing from Grant, because obviously, the New Zealand government is the shining light for social democrats around the world. And it's not just the sheer charisma of Jacinda Ardern, it's, the stuff they're doing as well. And, giving grants behind their wellbeing budget and various other things as the finance minister, we're really looking forward to those sessions with him.
After lunch, you've got those parallel sessions running again. There's one session which is looking at the lessons from the Hawke government. There's a conversation about the threat to superannuation, and there's also one about talking to voters of faith, which Chris Bowen and I had a very brief conversation when he was on the podcast not so long ago. I'll be interested to see the levels of interest from attendees on that particular topic, because I worry that the what I call the secular branch of our movement would dismiss this out of hand and think that people of faith don't really factor in the importance of trying to win elections. But I think it's a real issue for Labor.
I totally agree, and I heard your conversation with Chris, and Chris and I have discussed it ourselves, and I think it's a really important issue for us. There is absolutely no dichotomy between the social justice aspirations of Labor and the social justice tenets of many, many religions, and I think we ignore voters of faith at our electoral peril. And it's not about, like every segment of voters, it's not about those agreeing with our full menu, but it's about, making sure they understand and that we can have conversations with them on policies that they would agree with and that they might be able to support. We don't just have to ignore one full section of the community. And, Labor traditionally has had a strong assessment of people of voters of faith, the support, from people of voters of faith, historically. So I think that learning and understanding how we can talk to them rather than talking down to voters of faith, I think is really important. And that doesn't mean we need to compromise some of our strongest held values, but it also means we don't have to dismiss the views of other people out of hand.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things if you think about in the United States in the early days of the Bush, George W. presidency, he wasn't actually from Texas, but obviously he was from Texas in air quotes. And the Republicans at that point in time had a reasonably good handle on the Latino vote in the southern parts of the United States, largely through the shared social values between the Republican Party and the social values of Latino voters, particularly Catholic voters, around matters of choice and whatnot. But and you would think that if you're a Democrat, we've lost that vote to the Republicans. But you fast forward now to 2019 and watch the way that the Republicans have handled immigration and a whole bunch of other issues, DACA, all of that kind of stuff. They've almost lost that vote now. Like if you look at the numbers, the Democrats are polling so much stronger in the Latino communities right across the country because they've managed to build a relationship with those voters on other issues that are equally, if not just as important or more important. So there's no reason why we can't do that here in Australia as well with people of faith, and also remembering that a lot of people of faith are also from migrant backgrounds, which historically have always been a strong pillar of that Labor coalition.
Exactly. I just think we cut our own throats if we ignore whole sections of voting public. I mean, you're a campaigner, Stephen, but as you know, it's about getting enough votes to win wherever they come from. And, maybe you don't win a majority of voters of faith, but if you win enough of them and add those votes to all the other votes you get, you can win elections. I just think that we are in danger of rejecting out of hand voters of faith because there are, particularly people who purport to speak on behalf of voters of faith who have views that we would generally find anathema. But that doesn't mean all voters of faith hold all of those views. And Labor shouldn't be seen to hold views that are anathema to all voters of faith in return.
Then late that afternoon, Jim Chalmers, the Shadow Treasurer, has the floor and will deliver a speech on economics, which then sets up a discussion immediately in the same room where the question is a new economic policy, and the question is being posed: what are Labor's economic values? Which is going to be an interesting conversation. You've got some good people in that session. I want to talk a little bit about that component.
Yep. So we've got Craig Jericho from The Guardian. We've got one of my fellow think tankers in Emma Dawson. We've got Cameron Klein, former senior business figure in Australia. And we've got Ben Davis from the AWU and some academic economists as well. And I think really it's having a conversation about where to now, what is the state of the economy, where should Labor be heading, what sort of things should we be looking at as we go forward. I think it's going to be quite a robust, I suspect probably a big picture conversation rather than getting down in the weeds, but a good, robust conversation about where the economy is headed and what we should be doing about responding to it. Because at the moment, the economy is heading towards life support.
The next day, after Linda White from the ASU, who's also the chair of Chifley, kicks off that morning session, Ben LaBault, who was a former Obama press secretary in 2012 and was a White House spokesperson, is going to do the keynote address. Great getting Ben. Tell us a bit about give us a bit of background about Ben and what he's going to be speaking on.
Yeah, so Ben, as you say, was a national campaign spokesman for Obama in 2012 and did a lot of the White House spokesmanship for Supreme Court justices in the second term of Obama, but he's also sort of a campaign spokesman for Rahm Emanuel's tilt for mayor of Chicago, which he won, and for Sherrod Brown's tilt for senator in Ohio, which Sherrod Brown, of course, won. So he's, strong campaigning background. So in a sense, he's a little bit of the counterpoint to Rivkin the day before. So Rivkin is to sort of, get people thinking about the big picture in terms of policy. and around the world. And Ben's a bit to talk about the big picture in terms of campaigning. He's now running his own campaigning, working in a senior role in the campaigning business and digital campaigning in particular. So, so he's going to sort of, draw on sort of, the campaigning lessons that they've learnt since the 2016 election to get themselves, the Democrats back off their feet and so competitive in the midterms, and what were the successes of those midterm elections, and are there any lessons that we should learn from that, as well as, a little bit about, where we are heading in terms of, the fight on social media, if you like, and the digital campaigning. So I think it's going to be quite interesting, and he's going to have a lot of good meaty insights for us. And I'm sure that questioners will also ask who he thinks is going to win the primary.
That'll be tough for him to try and stay impartial if he so chooses, given that the field is quite wide and varied. And then as we move through the afternoon, Chris Bowen's going to be leading a conversation on, which is what we were basically talking about at the top of the program, the worldwide crisis in social democracy. Is going to be joined by a couple of people from overseas, which will be a great session. And that's actually just the only session at that point in time. So big attendance for that conversation.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to make that. I deliberately put it so that it wasn't clashing with anything else, because I think, we've got some overseas people coming. We want to have that full conversation and that richness about, I guess, what we were talking about right at the start, in a sense. Where to for social democracy? What is the future? What lessons can be learned from Europe? What lessons can be learned from America? I've got Carol Johnson from Adelaide Uni with a bit of an academic focus on this, who spent a lot of time researching the future of social democracy and where we are. So I think that's a really robust discussion that we want to have, and learn the lessons from as we go forward. And I think Chris is a great sort of thinker on these deeper, wider issues of the future of social democratic parties. So I think it'd be great to lead it off.
Without going through the rest of the card for the Sunday, there's 12 sessions from 10:40 all the way through to the end of the day, including an address from the ACTU Secretary Sally McManus and a closing address from Tanya Plibersek. What sessions there jump out at you that you're most interested in getting some insight into?
Yeah, well, there's one session that I know lots of people are always interested in. This is on the future of work, and we've tried to do something a little bit special with this one, or a little bit different. Because we've been talking about the future of work forever. So this is not about robots are going to take my job. This is actually to have a good conversation about where future jobs will come from. So it's the opposite of a doom and gloom future of work session. It's about where future jobs will come from, what sort of things should we be looking at, what policy levers should we be pushing in that. But we've also got, the Open National Secretary Paul Erickson is going to be involved in a panel on how do we know what voters want, in light of the fact that, particularly for something like a Labor Party, we sort of public opinion polls seem to have been discredited all around the world. Local media has virtually disappeared. For Labor people in particular, so some of our branches are sort of moribund, and so so it's a conversation about, given those traditional sources of political intelligence are sort of been downgraded, if you like, in the last 2 decades, how do we know what voters want, and how should we be responding, and what new tools should we be focused on? And I've got one of the best marginal seat campaigners in the country, in Amanda Wishworth from South Australia, joining us for that panel as well. We've also got a great panel on whether we all will be destined to live in a future of blocks of flats and apartments and overcrowded cities. So it's a conversation on the future of cities with a number of Victorians, actually, who are doing really interesting stuff in planning work. So yeah, there's a whole smorgasbord of things to choose from, and you can find the full agenda on a link on the Chifley website, so www.chifley.org.au.
And this, the format of these breakout sessions, is audience participation encouraged at the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so we want people to have their say, ask questions, be involved. And, we're sort of the anti-Q&A. You don't have to pretend your opinion is a question. You can just say it's an opinion. And we're happy to do that and happy to have feedback because, we really want to encourage people to have their say as well as, and engage with the speakers that we've got. We're really pretty bad at tapping into the Labor diaspora, if you like, in the Labor Party. We've got lots of good people, thousands and thousands of members who would like to contribute in many different ways, and a lot of them would like to contribute by ideas and stuff. And so one of the things we are trying to encourage is that people can give their viewpoints. Obviously we don't want them pontificating for 20 minutes at a time, but short, sharp viewpoints, we really want that. And we're also going to have a session on the first day at lunchtime, which we've jokingly called Labor Leader for the Day. But it's a serious session about encouraging audience members to come and have a conversation and tell us what their number one priorities would be if they were leading the Labor Party.
That's fantastic. I did see that. I actually was wondering what that was. So
that's what that is. That's what that is. It's a full immersion participation experience for audience members, and just coordinated by one of the Chifley board. So yeah,
fantastic. And just a reminder to everyone, where can they get a copy of the program? Just have a look. Just give this those details.
So just to have a look, because tickets are sold out, and we're very happy with that. So it's www.chifley.org.au. And that's the normal Chifley website, and there's a tab off that, which is the Towards 2022 conference with the full agenda. And also in the next couple of days, we've had a few of the participants write some op-eds just loosely around the theme of the conference, in terms of renewing Labor and where to from here and towards 2022. So we'll be putting those up on the website in the next few days as well, just a handful from some of the people who've agreed to write op-eds for us. So that'll be some interesting reading too for those who can't come along.
Fantastic. And great news that it's sold out as well. Unfortunate for those who did want a ticket, but great to see such a huge response from people across the Labor movement, not just in the Sydney metro area and country New South Wales, but also across the states as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think it's really positive. I think that it shows that there is a hunger in the Labor movement for these sort of discussions, and I think the excellent attendance you guys got in your CAN conference in 2018 showed that as well. I was lucky enough you invited me to speak at that, and there was. I think there really is a hunger from Labor people to be involved and to have these sort of discussions, and we need to do more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and that was a takeaway from the CAN conference that we did run last year. Your session was possibly the only legitimate kind of policy discussion session, and it was standing room only. So definitely. A lot of people are very keen on having those kind of conversations and sharing experiences around the development of policy and how it's going to impact on the wider society. So it's a great initiative. I think it's fantastic. And for those people who actually can't make it, Socially Democratic is the official podcast for the conference. So there will be a number of sessions that we will be recording them and publishing them next week on Socially Democratic, and then obviously be available through all the different kind of podcast apps. So if you can't attend, don't stress. We will publish a number of those conversations to Socially Democratic, and also we'll be doing a couple of interviews, like direct one-on-one interviews with some of the people that are will be some of the guest speakers, some of the other international guest speakers, and some of our other guest speakers from across the states and territories, which will be great. I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yep, no, I'm glad that you're partnering with us, Stephen. You do great work on the Socially Democratic podcast. I think it's essential listening for all of us on the centre left.
Brilliant, good stuff. And I'll slip you that $50 when I'm up in Sydney for that little comment. Thanks very much.
I look forward to seeing you on the weekend.
Yes, indeed. And for those who are going, where is it? What time do they need to get there? Parking, public transport? What's the deal?
So it's held at the New South Wales Teachers Federation Auditorium, which is in Surrey Hills, which is a short 5 to 6 minute walk from Central Railway Station in Sydney. There may be some parking in the streets, but it's probably metered parking, so it will cost you a bomb. There is a parking station, the Goulburn Street parking station is the closest one, and it's also about 6 or 7 minute walk from the venue. So we will kick off at 8:30 a.m. sharp. So registrations will be open from 8 a.m. for those coming along. And we'll be sending out an email to all ticket holders in the next day that says all that. But thank you for letting me make that plug now.
Not a problem. And best of luck with the whole event. I'll see you up there on Saturday morning. But until then, get busy preparing and we'll talk soon.
I will indeed. Thanks, Stephen.